And okay, so welcome to Office Hours. Y'all have shown up, so you know who I am, Norma Malfatti, the Director for Evangelical Mission for our Synod. And I am super delighted to welcome all of you to my office hours today, and particularly Pete Royce, who is joining us from Rochester, Minnesota. So Pete has been the consultant from GSB Fundraising that's been working with us in the Synod. Super fabulous, has been a great coach for us in talking about our generosity practices here in upstate New York, as well as Pete used to be the Director for Evangelical Mission in Southeast Minnesota, which is actually where I met Pete. And so I've spent a lot of time getting to know him over the last couple of years before he transitioned out of that role and into GSB full time. So thanks for being here, Pete.
Sure, glad to do it.
Yeah. If we could just take a moment just to introduce ourselves. We had quickly, for those of you who were here early, I made you introduce yourselves, but now that we've got more folks and Pete can know who you are.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm gonna call on you just according to how you're on my screen. So Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm the pastor of Our Savior's Lutheran in Horseheads and Dean of the Southern Tier Conference.
Joyce.
Yes, I'm Joyce Fiore, and I'm currently on two different mission and transition teams, one almost to be finished, and the other with Megan at St. John's Altamont, which is a suburb of, I don't know how else to describe it, a suburb of Albany.
Good.
Yeah, thanks. Serena.
Cheryl says hello.
Okay, thanks. Tell her I said hi back. Serena.
Hi, I'm Serena. I'm the pastor at Townline Lutheran Church, which is outside of Buffalo, New York, in Alden. So,
Okay.
And here, Norma, this cat's for you.
Oh, thanks,
I know you're a cat person.
I am.
He's my ever-present Zoom assistant.
I am sure that my Zoom assistant will come join us shortly. It's about his hour. Naomi.
Hi, I'm Naomi Parkhurst. I'm from Emmanuel Lutheran in Clay, New York. I'm currently, as I said before, in Illinois. I've been here since March 10th with my mom during this whole phenomena.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for being here. Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Connolly, and as Joyce said, I'm from St. John's Lutheran Church in Altamont, and I am on their call committee, which is kind of a new venture for me. Not that St. John's hasn't done it before, being 100 and many years old, but
Yeah.
looking forward to learning some new stuff.
Awesome, thanks. Susan.
Hi, I'm Pastor Susan Forsythe with Lutheran Memorial Church in North Syracuse. And I'm trying, hoping, I've only been there since late January, but I'm hoping to get them over this idea that they're just gonna do the least for stewardship because they don't like it and we have a perfect excuse to doing more because we are in unusual times.
Okay.
Great. And Jana.
Hi, I'm Jana Grant from St. John's in Altamont, New York. And I'm just here to gain some information. Now, I can't see my own picture. Can you guys see me, or am I?
No.
No, but I will. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to start your video, and that might help. You should get a little pop-up.
Not invited?
There we go.
Hey, Jana, there you are.
Here I am.
For people newer to Zoom, sometimes it's easier for the host to invite you to share than trying to explain.
Well, you're gonna watch me. You're gonna watch me
quickly.
eat my breakfast because I work nights when I just woke up. So.
No worries.
Good
When
morning.
people got on, I was finishing my lunch. So awesome. Thanks to all of you for being here today. I know some of you are here just because it's the topic of generosity and trying to figure that out, and others, just to make connections with others. But Pete, I'm going to toss it over to you to say a little bit more about beginning a culture of generosity. For Megan and Jana, I don't know if Pastor Joyce had passed on the email that I sent out last night to our pastors in the Synod. I'm hoping that, Naomi, you got something from Pastor Dick?
I might have, but I might not have read it yet.
No worries.
I talked to him this morning, but I didn't check my email, so.
Okay, no worries. So we have an opportunity to work with GSB around generosity, and specifically working with them and their process called Beginning a Culture of Generosity, which is really about helping congregations with a fall stewardship appeal, and doing that digitally, right? So everything is on Zoom in that way. But with a particular focus, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this to upstate New York is because we're in these really weird times. And I can imagine that some congregations are still not going to be worshiping face to face when the fall comes, just because those are the decisions that those congregations make. So we wanted to engage Pete in helping us and coaching us through how do we talk about money when talking about money already makes us uncomfortable, and add on a layer of a pandemic and the financial challenges that some families are having these days. It makes some of us even more anxious. So with that, Pete, I'll toss it to you to share a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, so this beginning of culture of generosity is actually a new process for us at GSB. And it was developed actually because of the pandemic that we're in the middle of. What we realized was that in most situations, or in many congregations, that there's a lot of anxiety right now about money, about the future. How do we talk about it? People are losing their work, or they're underemployed, so how do we invite them to give? All those questions are kind of swirling. And we know that if congregations end 2020 kind of on a down note financially, that will only ramp up the anxiety as we head into 2021, and that will significantly impact the ministry you're able to do, because when people get anxious, they in the church, one of the easiest things they want to do is if we cut the budget, then we can bring the budget down to our giving, and then we can move forward. And we don't necessarily find that helpful. Partly because, I am fully convinced that the church is positioned perfectly for the situation that we're in right now. And in a world that is highly anxious, and there's lots of fear, and we in the church know how to talk about fear. In a world where many people are suffering, we know how to care for people. We know how to love our neighbor. We know how to serve. That's part of our DNA. In a world where people need community because they're feeling lonely, they're feeling isolated, we know about this. We know how to build community. Now we've had to find new ways to do it, but it's a big piece of who we are. And as the virus gets in our own neighborhoods, and as people we know and love are sick and die potentially, we know how to talk about life and death. I am one that is fully convinced that God has a purpose for the church as it is right now, to really make a big difference in the world. And if the church starts pulling back and saying, well, we can't afford this, we're out of money, we woe is us, well, then that mission won't be accomplished in quite the same way. So, I am a person who's fully convinced that God provides, that God is walking with us in the midst of this, and truly that we can have hope at this time. So because of that, we developed this beginning a culture of generosity, which, as Norma said, is an online process to lead your team through an annual appeal this fall. Now, we know that in some congregations, annual appeals are a regular event. In other congregations, annual appeals may never have been done. But what we want to do with this is kind of provide some low-hanging fruit to walk with congregations, to give them the tools that they need to end the year well, and to enter into 2021 with some hope and with some momentum to say, God is blessing us, God is good, and we have the capacity to grow in ministry and continue to do things. the kind of the stated goal of beginning a culture of generosity is to help congregations return to 2019 giving levels. We'd like to maybe bring it a little bit above that, but really this is about returning to where you have been. It's about stability. It's about keeping your ministry strong. But in this process, so there are 6 online meetings where we have 1-hour cohort meetings where I will gather with groups from congregations to kind of train them in this process. And where this is different than some, we're not just going to hand you a book and say, this is how to do it, go do it. We're going to actually walk you through the whole thing. So we'll kind of take it step by step, talking about some of the best practices, sharing the best ways to do things, and then helping you to actually do that, to implement it. There will be, so there'll be the 6 online gathering times. There will be some videos that we're going to be making that will be available for your teams that they can be watching. There will be templates that you can be using for some of your materials, for some of the letters or some of the different things, where you'll insert some of your, a portion of your own story. We don't want this just coming out of a book and going to your people and feeling impersonal. We need to personalize this and make it, you know, a little bit from your congregation as well. But at the heart, what we're working on is helping your congregation tell the story of ministry. To take us away from people giving to budgets, to giving to a line item or giving to salaries. It's easy for congregations to get caught in that trap, but to help the congregation tell stories of the ministry that's happening, the impact the ministry is happening, the lives that are being changed, the people who are already being generous, who are being part of this, you know, all those kind of, you know, roll into the whole process that we would, like I said, that we walk you through. So that you can finish well. So there's generosity stories in there. There's letters being sent. There's the format that we follow, which is really kind of the best practices for how to invite generosity, is we're going to inform, we're going to motivate, we're going to ask, and we're going to thank. You know, that's always the rhythm that we'll do. So we'll let people know what we're doing. We'll get them excited about the fact that we're doing it. We will invite them to give to it, and then at the end we'll thank people. In the church, we haven't always been very good at thanking. You know, I've actually gotten into debates with treasurers who say, well, but people should give to the church, so why do we have to thank them for doing what they should do? And it's really incumbent on us to do that. And one, it's just good practice. You know, it's just a polite thing to do. But it also connects people to our ministries as well. It makes them know we're not taking their gifts for granted. One thing that after the 2008 financial crisis, some of you may have heard me say this if you've heard me talk before, but after the 2008 financial crisis, there was some research done on philanthropy in the United States. And what they found was that people remained pretty much as generous as they had been. But what changed was where they gave their monies. They gave their monies to organizations they thought were making a difference. And so what we'll be doing in this process is helping you to see how your church is making a difference. Help you focus on what you're doing and not on what you're not doing. It's easy to say, well, we can't do X, Y, and Z, and you may not be able to, but there are things, ministry is still happening. So how do we talk about that? How do we invite generosity to that? You know, so kind of the last piece here is, you know, I hear people say quite often, well, how can we invite people to give? Because many people have lost their jobs. And that's true. I mean, we understand that for some, this is a hugely challenging time, but not for everybody. And so we are still going to be inviting generosity. It's important that we do that, but we do that not just around money, to say we need more money, but this is we focus on ministry, to say this is what we feel called to do, and this is what it's going to take to do what we feel called to do. And so we invite people to be a part of that, and whether they can give or not, they're still going to want those things to happen. And so if they're out of work and trying to put food on the table, obviously their giving will be impacted by that. But every congregation is full of people who aren't in that situation. I was actually just talking to a person this morning who said, you know, we had several trips planned for this, vacations planned for the summer that aren't going to happen. We actually have a lot more money than we thought we were going to have. And that's not an uncommon story. Or other people who have said for years, well, we're on a fixed income, as if that's a bad thing. Well, right now, for many, fixed income feels pretty good. So there are ways we can still talk about it. There are ways we can still invite people to generously give. but always focused on ministry and always focused on the mission of what we're trying to do together. So the process kind of kicks off in August and runs through November. And so often, usually Congregations Appeal Sunday will be sometime in the midst of that time. There will be a time for people to return intent cards, and you'll follow up to ensure that you get as many of those as possible. The advantage of the intent card is people who make a plan give more. Not because we twisted their arm, but they're doing what they thought it through, and they're doing what they wanted to do. And so that's simply what we're inviting people to do, to take a deep breath, to stop and think, what is my congregation doing? What ministry are we accomplishing? What lives are we changing? And based on that, what do I plan to give in the coming year? And so we'll really emphasize all those things and then end the process with some conversation of how do we talk about the end of the year? How do we invite people to give generously in December, which is always a large month in pretty much every congregation. So, but we'll do that with intentionality. That's a lot of me just talking very quickly, which I can do. What wonderings do you have? What questions do you have? What worries might you have as you think about either this process or kind of stewardship, maybe in general? Because it is a unique time.
While people are thinking of questions, one of the things that, and I think it was Mike Ward, one of your colleagues at GSB, yep, who I heard say this, but right, the people who do research and like to learn about things, that they studied giving patterns after every recession over the last 50 years. And what they've found is after the recession, Protestants are giving more than they did before the recession, that their generosity levels increase. I don't know if that comes out of what that's about, whether or not we've learned more about generosity and serving our neighbors in need during those times.
We need to keep having recessions then, right?
Right, no.
No, that's not it.
But right, but I don't know if there's something that we learn in the process about how God's inviting us to support our neighbors, or if there's something else at play. But I just found that fascinating, and it gave me a little bit of courage in talking about money and that invitation to give, because we've shown that we love to give.
Mm-hmm. And people want to make a difference. I mean, that's a big piece of it. So the more we can feel like we can know we're making a difference, that's great.
Okay. So Serena asked, if our congregation does this, how big should the group be that leads the program?
And in some ways, it kind of depends on the size of the congregation, but I could easily envision in most congregations, 4 to 5 people would be sufficient. They could really shepherd this process through well. Yeah, because what they're going to be doing is, they're going to be guiding the process. They're going to be, tracking down, inviting people to tell stories and some of those pieces along the way. But the nice thing about this is that, in this process, it's a fairly targeted time frame. It's we'll kind of get ramped up late summer and we'll be done, by the end of the year. So
people aren't getting on a committee for the rest of their life.
No.
Although you might discover that you've got people who want to then be steward champions in your congregation.
They may enjoy it. And actually that's one thing we find is when this is done well and people can see tangible results of what they've done, it actually it is a lot of fun. It's fun to see other people get excited and be generous. It is contagious.
And I should have said earlier, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. Those of you on the call that are pastors, in the bishop's office hours, we do more of a moderated experience because there's usually 20 people on the call, which is harder. But since we all fit in a Brady Bunch square today, please feel free to jump in.
So talk more about telling the story. What do you mean by that?
So it's a couple different kinds of stories. Some of the stories we want to be telling are stories of the impact of your ministry. So people whose lives have been touched because of what your ministry is doing. You know, often in the church, we tell a lot of stories of what we do, but what it sounds like is that our goal is, if that's all we hear, it sounds like the goal of our ministry is to be busy. You know, so we list, you know, all these events that we're doing, which are good, but at the heart, the reason we're doing those things is because it's impacting people's lives. And so a list of activities is one thing, but hearing somebody whose life has been touched because of your ministry is a whole different thing. So I mean, that's a big piece of the communication part that is really critical, because then as people are thinking about being generous, they can say, well, I know that my generosity is leading to these kind of, you know, this kind of outcome. That makes a difference. So, and that's one kind of story. But the other are stories of people who are generous and kind of hearing some of their why. You know, why do you give? Why do you support your ministry? What excites you about your congregation? And there's in some ways, there's a little bit of cheerleading that goes on to say, you know, look what God is doing here. And so we're not bragging about the congregation, but we're celebrating what God is doing in our midst. And that's really, I think, who we are as the church. You know, the more we're telling stories of what God is doing among us and the lives that are being touched because of God's work. And that's good for generosity. It's just good for a church, you know, because it really helps us to be who we are.
I wonder if this might be an example, Pastor Joyce. So the congregation I belong to, we hold Loads of Love, a laundry ministry where we pay for people's laundry. And for one of the congregations, so one of the ways we could tell the story is we helped support 25 people, and we made possible 50 loads of laundry today. Or, right, which is great, and it tells people how many people we served and how many loads of laundry were done. Or we could tell the story about the mom who came in with a garbage bag full of clothing to do laundry, and how she's now able to send her kids to school, and they're not going to get made fun of because their clothes are dirty and smell. So it's giving an opportunity for kids to have some dignity and not be bullied at school. Right? You see the difference, and maybe you might have even felt something as I was telling the story of this mom who was in tears, so grateful, which is a true story, by the way, right? That there's something that moves us in hearing about someone's life being touched versus numbers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we found very effective is to have speakers come during our fellowship time that were affected. I mean, I'm thinking of more organizations, but not necessarily that told what our appeal or our support meant to the community and to individuals. But there was a face connected to the appeal, more, not only our face, but the face of the people it actually touched. But my question is, well, I've already made my case, a personal appeal from people, that groups, whatever, that you would support. But sometimes I think the written word just gets kind of thrown, oh, here's another story, and you kind of throw it away. So would you talk about how to write something? I mean, you know, appeal is dependent on how good the writer is.
Somewhat, and we're going to be talking about opportunities for people to be sharing these stories verbally as well. And so, we think of the kind of the temple talk model, where people speak before worship and kind of share some of their story. If we're not in person in fall, I think we can be creative and find ways to do that, where people can tell about how the ministry has touched them. Or that can be done via video. And actually, I've had a number of congregations that have done videos to tell these stories. And there's one congregation, kind of along where Norma was going with this, where their goal was they wanted to send kids to camp, and so they're raising money to send kids to camp. And instead of saying, well, as they reported back, instead of saying we sent 25 kids to camp, Bible camp this year wasn't that great, they put a video together of 3 10-year-old boys who learned how to pray. And these boys were telling how they learned how to talk to God. And that was so much more powerful than any numbers that you could do. I understand, written word sometimes has its challenges because people can jump over it, but we're a very visual oral culture right now. So the more we can get those stories in front of people in a spoken or video visual way is great. But really, these are stories that we want to be telling at the heart year round, and we'll be teaching you how to do it part of a stewardship process. But really, the more all year round you can be telling stories of the way that God has worked among you, and making sure that people are making the connection that God has actually worked at our church. On my cynical days, I think sometimes in the church we're actually functional atheists, that we preach a lot of good stuff, but we don't actually live as if we believe God was doing anything. Only on the cynical days, not all of them. But that said, so the more we're helping people connect that God is at work in our midst, I think the better. It's a reason right now where I am encouraging congregations who have gone to online worship, instead of saying we're doing worship online and 275 people are logging in, and in many congregations the narrative has been that they have more people worshiping now online than they ever did face to face, which is a great story. But also hearing individual stories from people who are personally connecting with your online worship, again, as a way to help people see ministry is still happening. We may not be together in the building, but ministry is still happening.
Right. Oh, like this is the story of the shut-in who is now able to worship with her congregation that previously hadn't been in worship in 3 years. Right. Those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
To that idea, I mean, there's telling the story about that, but looking at certainly during the time, I mean, you said it's kind of a Zoom thing, but certainly during the time we're setting up a fall campaign, are there tips, techniques to moving a chunk of the fall campaign online? I mean, I've reaching out online, having the online donation button, having ways to move into this world in a sense of, from the generosity side, because we can tell the story, we can reach out, but well, I'm not even sure we can do that, but not being able to say it, potentially not being able to have the table talks in the church, potentially not being able to, and mailings will reach out to the folks on our mailing list, but now with worship online in one sense or another, that's not necessarily a different audience, but a wider audience than we've had before. And will there be some kind of tools or techniques or best practices for telling the story and receiving responses online? Yeah,
and using any kind of social media or things, and really at this point we need to be using all the tools at our disposal. And for me, that's actually been the beauty of congregations that have started doing more video format for people telling the stories rather than just someone standing up and talking on Sunday. Because in the video format, that could be, when people talk on Sunday, in the traditional sense, when you, in the old days, back when you were actually face to face, the people in the building at the time heard the story and were impacted, but it didn't really live out beyond that. But as we can make things into videos or make it available outside, then it can go onto social media. And that's where it really starts to take on a life of its own, because then people are starting to connect. People who are associated with the story start sharing that, and then people well outside your normal circle really can connect with that. Normally part of an annual appeal process that we would have bulletin inserts. We know that this year bulletin inserts may or may not, have the same impact, but the same information, the same things can be sent out in multiple ways. So it doesn't have to always just be paper being handed by hand, but it's kind of the general, how do we get these things out there so that, so people are aware of what we're doing, they're informed and they're motivated before we ask. And it's really critical that we do that we inform and we motivate before we ask, because otherwise it just feels like a financial transaction of, you know, the church needs money, you have money, can I have some please? But it really gets it around the why. And we want to be focusing on the purpose of your congregation, which is a good thing.
But I think we have to be very careful about confidentiality, telling stories. And that's something that always is a concern of mine.
Yeah, and we have to tell stories that we have permission to tell. Well, yeah, they always have to have permission. In some cases, people give permission to tell the story without a name associated with it. That, you know, and like the woman that Norma talked about, you know, I have no idea who that woman is. I could never track her down, but the story can have some impacts. And so some of those are still okay. But no, I hear you. We need to be sensitive. Because in the church, we're dealing with, you know, with challenging parts of people's lives. So, yeah.
I think, like, I'm new at my church, and, you know, after 2 months, we hit COVID-19, or got hit by it. So what I would normally have done is at this time of the year, I would have been getting to know my congregation and community, looking, you know, visiting any missions we had, looking for new or related mission opportunities. And what I'm learning is sort of, one, it's like we have a great family church. And one of the gifts is just that we've worked really hard to stay connected. Okay, so that's good. We have a clothing ministry. We had a lot of ministries that are not as hands-on, right? But there's one clothing ministry that worked with a local school to stock their clothing closet. But of course, the school's closed. So the clothing ministry's on hold. We have a member of the church who headed up one of the local food pantries, but she's done it for 30 years. And so at the end of next month, you know, she's resigning from that and passing that on. So, like, I'm looking around and I'm saying, okay, I want to have these great stories to tell, and there are very personal stories, I guess, you know, people saying, wow, I feel so cared for by my community, and that's great. But in the wider community, not sure where we are, and I want to have those great stories. So I don't know quite what the question is, because I'm sort of frustrated at this moment in terms of beginning to work kind of our mission, how it could grow, and also, you know, what are the stories that we would be telling?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I think how I want to respond is in this time of crisis, in some ways, congregations go back to their core values. They go back to the things that are important, the most important to them. Those are the things that continue forward. And so it sounds like in your context, you know, building community is one of the huge values that they have. And so on one hand, that's one thing really to be celebrating as much as possible right now. It sounds like some of the other ministries, which are kind of some growing edges, you know, it's a little harder to be at the growing edges in the middle of crisis. Now, that said, you know, I am convinced that the longer that we're in this pandemic, you know, I think a lot of people just, you know, when this started, we all thought this was going to be over in about 2 or 3 weeks and we go back to normal. Well, we know that's not the case. You know, now there's all the anxiety of when do we start up and worship again? Well, I think that sometimes that actually misses the point too, because we're going to be living in this world for a while. And so, you know, with your leadership or with your whole congregation, just starting to ask the question, who are we as a church in a pandemic? Because we're going to be in this for a while. And so, you know, getting at some of those harder questions of what's possible, what ministry can we do? And the congregation I'm a part of here in Rochester, serving the community is a huge part of what we do. And that's really what we're known for. And every organization that we work with is not taking, either shut down or is not taking volunteers right now. And so, and we're still struggling right now to figure out how do we connect with our community, because that's such a core value, but we're not able to live it right now. And that's frustrating us like crazy. So but helping your people start to think of what possibilities could look like in a pandemic. And these may not be long-term, but at least, you know, it can say, how can we make a difference now? And the other question I think that sometimes goes with that, which helps you to understand what your values are, is to ask the question of people, what do they miss the most? Because there may be some ministries that people spend a whole lot of time doing, but that you can't do right now, but which nobody actually misses. It's just, you know, a lot of busy work. But there may be other things that people desperately miss that you're not able to do, and that actually tells you something. You know, and in some places it's community, and that's important. But if there's other things that people miss, that at least opens the door to a conversation, and then we can start thinking about, is there a way to do that in a different way? But
yeah,
but at the beginning, just keep telling the story and tell the core stories, because that's what gets people the most excited immediately.
And I wonder, and this, I don't mean to lead us down a rabbit hole, but to just ask the question, I wonder what it would look like to call the school where you had, right, where you'd partnered and say, so we know this is on hold, how else might we support? Or are there other ways that we can get close?
Yeah.
Like thinking about, right, those places where you partner in the community and just talking with those partners to wonder aloud, how can we still help? If we're doing this and we can't anymore, is there something else we can do? And it could be a simple thing. This is a shameless plug for those of you with young ones in your life. The bishop will be is going to be doing story time with kids. And so only kids are allowed to sign up for it, but to tell and read children's stories and Bible stories to them. And I wonder if there's ways that you could support teachers by leading a story time. You know, I'm just making stuff up, but just to wonder out loud with your community partners about helping in a different way.
Yeah, we actually did start talking about how one of our ladies could maybe get videotaped doing a story for the nursery school kids. I don't know that we've set that up yet, but I know we talked about it.
Mm-hmm. You know, at times like this, it's easy to focus on what we can't do. And when we go down that rabbit hole, it can just frustrate people. But, you know, to ask what are the possibilities at a time like this, again, it reframes the conversation, and it helps people to see that this is, you know, we're in this for a little while, and if we're going to be in this for a little while, you know, let's work together on it.
But I think one of the, well, at least I have to give a personal accounting, is the way I learned to be generous was to make a budget.
Okay.
We took what my husband and I took what we had, and we said, how are we going to do this? How are we going to manage our money? And we started making rules about how much we'd spend for this, and this. And when we got done, my gosh, we found out we had more money than we thought we had.
Yeah.
And we could start giving it much more. And I don't think people realize the control of money in your own personal life. If you have control of that, you can be much more generous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's at all helpful. It was helpful to me to realize I had much more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, my question is, how often do you bring up stewardship or given whether it's a flyer in a bulletin or an announcement at church? Because I know at our church, sometimes every week someone's mentioning something about giving money, and it gets to the point, if you have the Girl Scouts stand up and talk about what she's doing, and then you have property stand up and talk about how they need money. Mm-hmm. To me, I don't want the new people who are starting to come to church to all of a sudden feel like I can't just come here and enjoy the service, you know, almost like an bombardment of asking for their money. And I don't want to be rude, but I have to leave for an appointment in just a few minutes. So if you see me leave the meeting, it's so I can get to my second appointment.
Get mad and take your ball and go home.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
it's a great question. So I talked about the four things: the inform, the motivate, the ask, and the thank. I think it's important on a regular basis to help people be connecting their giving with the ministry that's happening. And that doesn't always involve asking. A lot of times that involves the informing and motivating and thanking. So as you tell stories of ministry and the outcomes of people's lives are being touched, what we want to be doing then is connecting that back to, this is possible because of your generous support. Thank you. So it's not a plea for money every week, and that's not helpful. But we make sure that people are constantly connecting the fact that their generosity is leading to something. It's not going to a black hole somewhere, but something good is coming out of their generosity. So that's a big piece of the puzzle. But the more we're talking about mission and what's happening, it's easier to invite people to give to that. Otherwise, it just does feels like an endless laundry list of things that we need to be giving money for. Whereas if we're informing and motivating and people can get excited about it, they may make the decision they may not be able to give, but they're not going to begrudge other people for doing it. They're going to say, I really want to see this happen. I hope somebody is able to support it if I can. So the more we can focus on the mission and the ministry and the motivational piece, I think that the stronger it is. But tell those stories, the outcome stories, and connect it to giving and thank people all the time.
Okay, great.
And thanking
Thank
people
you.
is a critical piece of the puzzle. But it's not begging, it's thanking.
Thank you.
Actually, just along with that, it's not going to show up because I have my background. I have a little book by Henry Nouwen called the Spirituality of Fundraising. And people don't, Henry Nouwen, for those who don't know, a deeply spiritual writer, deep thinker. And people don't associate him with fundraising, but he has this little book on fundraising. And just a couple lines of this I think that apply. He says, fundraising is proclaiming what we believe in such a way that we offer other people an opportunity to participate with us in our vision and mission. Fundraising is precisely the opposite of begging. When we seek to raise funds, we're not saying, please, can you help us out? Because lately it's been hard. Rather, we're declaring we have a vision that is amazing and exciting. We're inviting you to invest yourself through the resources God has given you in this work to which God has called us. And that really, I think, gets at the heart of what I'm trying to talk about here is how do we talk about that grand vision of what God is calling us to be about and invite people into that, which is very different than just talking about money and we need to break even and we're $2,000 behind. But that's the big picture of this is how we're a part of what God is already up to in our midst.
And I think to kind of piggyback off of Jana's question and what you said, Pete, I think it also behooves us in that storytelling as people get younger, their desire is to see that their giving makes a difference. Right? So there's some generational shifts that happen with giving patterns. Right at the beginning, Pete was talking about, like we give because we're supposed to, right? And people in my mother's generation, that was just like an automatic. You give, you tithe, that's what you do. And people who are younger, I would say somewhere around the 40-ish age range and down, they're only going to give money to things that they think are effective and are making a difference in the world. And not that people who are older don't want to see that their money's effective and makes a difference in the world, but that sense of duty is not there in younger generations that they are in older generations. And it's just a shift that's happened. And so that's where the inform piece becomes even more critical as you engage your younger members in giving and those young families, that they hear those stories that say, yeah, this is right. Like St. John's in Altamont, we're doing some awesome stuff and caring for the people in our neighborhood. Or Emmanuel and Clay, right? We're part of a larger group. And right, like, so Emmanuel is outside of Syracuse, and we did God's Work Our Hands Day. All the congregations in Onondaga County, we did God's Work Our Hands Day together, which was pretty awesome. And it got more people to participate because we knew that we were doing it alongside others. I think, which has nothing to do with how much money people gave, but how much impact we have as communities of faith.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to go soon, but when are we going to learn more so that we can help prep our churches for this?
So this was it. And you should have in your email, Pastor Susan, I sent out an email last night to all of the rostered ministers. It would have gone to your S. Fortzig account, the personal one, not the church one. Mm-hmm. And so you've got a flyer that I sent out that you can return to the Synod office. Mm-hmm. That's why I had asked Naomi if Pastor Dick had shared that with you, because then filling out that form, you send it right into the Synod office, and we'll pass on the information to Pete and the folks at GSB. So there is a cost that's associated with it for those of you that haven't seen what I sent out to the pastors. It's $450 to participate. I have secured funding to cover $150 for every congregation that participates. So that means it only costs $300 to participate. And
there was,
yeah. I have to leave. Somebody's knocking on my door.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Joyce.
Wasn't there some potential for help with that? 300 from Thrivent or something?
Yeah, we're going to be coaching congregations on how to apply for, if they have Thrivent members, to apply for the action grants. Mm-hmm. And so that is a possibility as well.
Yeah. So that's $250, right? Which could mean that the impact on the finances in your congregation is $50. Which is certainly for, I think, all of our congregations doable, because for some people you might have a steward champion in your congregation that says, I'll write the check for $50 so that we can do this. And so we wanted to, right, both in securing the funding, and I think the way, if I'm speaking out of turn, Pete, please let me know. GSB wanted to structure this in a way that made it affordable for as many congregations to participate, because we know that this is such a different time that we're in, and we want to provide as much of an opportunity for to support congregational financial stewardship. Which is only one aspect of stewardship. There's all sorts of ways in which we think about stewardship. But in this particular aspect, we wanted to make sure that it was as broadly and widely available so that we were removing as many barriers.
Could I just ask, is that it's one charge for whatever group we pull together to?
Yeah. So for any congregation, so like for St. John's, it would just cost $300.
Okay.
So, yeah. Fabulous. Thanks, Pastor Serena. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Pastor Susan.
I have a question.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, Naomi, jump on in.
If by chance any congregations choose not to participate, or there's ones that are close to closing financially, can we offer that money to a congregation to get more than $150?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm thinking we need to have a conversation about generosity, Naomi.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So Naomi, actually, for real, if you wouldn't mind putting your email address in the chat box,
okay,
and I'll reach out to you. We can have a conversation offline about this.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
I also was wondering, does Synod have any kind of videos or anything like that that show some of these stories that Pete has told us about, that through Synod where the money specifically goes? Because for St. John's, we have not been huge supporters for Synod. Sorry. But I think that would be helpful for people to understand why we're supporting Synod ministries.
Yeah, in fact, we have a whole video storytelling that we do, and I will, Megan, if you wouldn't mind putting your email address in the chat box,
Sure.
I'll direct that to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we started doing video storytelling last year. We learned that in the beginning, it was a lot harder to get the stories on video than we thought. But now the ministry is growing again because now people are learning how to use technology differently. And so it's not as scary to take your phone out, wherever my phone is, I don't know, and record a quick video and send it on than it was a year ago when we first started doing this. But we definitely have a couple of stories that are already up and running. Yeah. So I'm gonna end the video. I'm just gonna press stop here.